Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Fiverson, and I am an evolutionary astrologer trained in the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. Thank you so much for being here and for giving me the opportunity to join in this collective dialogue. I'm going to talk today about the current wave of goddess energy that is permeating our celestial and terrestrial environments through the asteroids that most of us are familiar with. I love this image. I was up in Taos last week, and we went to a couple of museums, and this was hanging on the wall, and it was full size. It was 11 feet tall, and it just jumped out at me, and it said that it was there for me to use this as my opening screen. This is a Dine, a Navajo artist, and obviously this is not Athena and Eris and Hera, but the image just struck me as just really what's going on at the moment. And this is not to say that I don't see the feminine archetype as nurturing and soft and warm and receptive, but I think that this really reflects the context and the time that we're passing through. So I really want to start with understanding what has come before, so that we can understand what's happening today. And if we go back about 6,000 years ago, there were only fertility goddesses. There weren't male sky gods. We didn't have Mars and Pluto and Zeus, Jupiter. We didn't have any of that. We had maternity. We had the most precious and important event in human experience was the birth of a child. And as a result, life was celebrated, sexuality was exalted, and there were fertility goddesses that really covered all of civilization, and they all basically were the same image, with some variation. The point is that there was basically a single goddess, and there really were not a lot of male gods. Somewhere between 800 and 1200 BC, this is what happened. That single god became fractured. And so we had separate male gods, and we had the feminine archetype itself was splintered into Artemis and Demeter, Hera, Athena, etc., Vesta. And it's really how it's come down to us today. And it really reflects what has happened between the patriarchy and the matriarchy. It's also important to recognize that the matriarchy was not a governance. It was just the basis of the culture. However, when the patriarchy took over, when men realized that they had a part in the equation, that they were part of what was happening, they became the governance. And what we're seeing today is the turning of the wheel. We're seeing that movement, that cycle is changing and turning, and we are coming to a point where the matriarchy and the importance of the feminine archetype in our world is emerging and arising again. Whenever a new astrological body is discovered, it represents some leap or some change in human evolution. And up until 1801, we didn't even know about the asteroids. Ceres was discovered in 1801, Pallas Athena in 1802, Juno, I believe, 1804, and Vesta in 1811. I believe I have those in the right order. But we still didn't really know much about them. We recognized that they were up there. It was not until the 1970s that we actually had an ephemeris, that we actually were able to work with this astrologically, and they came into being. And not coincidentally, if we look back at that time period, the 1970s, it's when the women's movement really began to emerge. We had writers, Susan Sontag, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis was actually a little earlier in the 60s, Joan Baez. These women emerged into our world culture with a new voice, and with a voice that was expressing this need to balance the anima and the animus, and to recognize the importance of the feminine archetype and women in our culture. I like to say, we didn't come from our fathers; we came from our mothers, and this is something that I think has been forgotten, and it's coming back, and it's coming back in a hard way because it has been so repressed. Basically, today, in the time that I have, I'm going to talk about just three of these feminine archetypes. I'm starting with Pallas. Because I think that a lot of what's happening right now really is represented through Pallas Athena. Yeah, if we look at some of the transits that we've had just this year, Pallas not only was on the lunar north node through the eclipses, but she was conjunct Mercury from June actually through September. So she's had a tremendous impact on us. Pallas Athena is, I think, one of the most interesting of the Greek goddesses. If any of you have read the Iliad or the Odyssey, she plays a very important role there. Of all of the Greek pantheon, she was the most involved with mortals, with humans. And throughout those two classic texts, in the Iliad, she came to help all of the heroes in the Trojan War, and in the Odyssey, she was in some ways stood behind Ulysses, and guided him home over his 10-year journey. So I see her as someone who informs us. She has a lot of other roles. Certainly, she's the warrior queen. We know her for her strategy in war. We know for her activism that she would always try to negotiate peace before she would pick up the sword. In her case, it was the lance. Lift her aegis, lift her shield to defend herself. But she really comes through the stories from Homer as the friend of mortals, the friend of man, kind of like Prometheus in a way, where she's able to help us understand and know that which it is that we're not seeing or not knowing in order to guide us along our path. Vesta is also in play here. And Vesta as well, if I look at my notes here, Vesta I don't have Vesta here. Oh yeah, Vesta was conjunct Pluto, or will be conjunct Pluto from October through November at the end of this year. She's also very active in the charts that we're going to look at. But Vesta is our sacred bond to ourselves. She, of all of the gods, Hera, Zeus, all had temples. Demeter, the Eleusinian rites. There were no temples to Vesta, and that's because she was the hearth. She wasn't the fire within the hearth, the fire itself. She was the hearth itself. And she had a placement in every home and in every village, every town. She was the center of the community and the center of the family life. And the hearth itself was her temple. It's where she was recognized. And I think what's important to understand is that we all have that same place within ourselves. If we correlate that fire to spirit, to our own life force, to our own impulse, the fire that we have to self-actualize and become and be, that's the place that she holds, and that's why it's sacred, because it is the center. She was the first and the last. When Kronos ate his children, he ate her first, and he disengorged her last. So she has tremendous importance, and is often kind of overlooked because there were no temples and there is not a lot of mythology about her. but she was one of the virgin goddesses, and and we can digress from that. Virgin in Roman society only meant that she was an unmarried woman. There are stories. Demetra tells the story, and there are other speculations that actually she was in the lineage of Inanna, who went out, every evening and would bring the community into the temple for the sexual rites. And it's also said that in Roman society, that when warriors would return from war, a society that very much parallels our own, they're very warlike, constantly at war, the warriors would come back and spend time with the Vestals in order to be reintegrated into society, into culture, for their PTSD. The PTSD that runs through our military, not to mention the militarization of the world at the moment. But there's no outlet for it. There's no healing that's in place, to handle these energies of these men coming home who have been trained killers, and then they have to come back and live next door to you. The only place that they seem to fit is in law enforcement, and we can see the result of that, the impact of their saturation in our police forces, and the violence that's been occurring. So this is our sacred bond to ourself, our sacrifice to what we really believe to be meaningful, important, and sacred, and to be able to live according to that commitment. Juno, of all of the goddesses, is the only one that really is relationship dependent. She was married to Zeus. Zeus was actually her brother, and they were actually when they were first married. They hid the relationship. It was unknown to anybody. But the point being is that she was committed to her relationship to him, in spite of all his philandering and all of the things that he did that really denigrated her. She was the queen of heaven, and her place was supposedly equal to Zeus. It never really worked out that way. There was always a struggle to balance that power. And as a result, she was famous for her wrath and her anger. So we're gonna see how these dynamics, these psychological dynamics, are actually playing out for us at this time. Excuse me. I've selected two events which I think are really reflect what's happened over the past couple of years in terms of the women's movement and the reemergence of the divine feminine. The first is the Women's March, and then we're going to look at the outing of Harvey Weinstein. So this is the chart of the Women's March last January 21st in Washington. These are only the major aspects, because again, we've got some time limitations here. But if we look at this chart, we can see that there are two grand trines and a grand square, and the grand trine involves not only the asteroids, but it brings in Uranus, it brings in Venus and the Moon. And the grand square we have here is Uranus, Vesta, Jupiter, and Pluto. So there is a tremendous tectonic force that's in place here, with Uranus, Pluto, and Jupiter alone, adding a tremendous pressure and disruption and interruption and tremendous upheaval and cataclysms that are happening. And it all really came to a head on this day. This was the driving force behind really what brought all this together and turned out millions of people across our country in the United States and across the world to really come together as a community in order to recognize that things cannot continue the way that they have been going on. that there has to be an adjustment. There has to be some change. I see a Grand Cross, basically, I kind of categorize it as a lock. And as that Grand Cross gets transited on any one of its corners, it kind of turns it. It turns the tumblers. They're like tumblers that are frozen, and the tumblers will turn. But in this case, we're looking at a cardinal cross, so it was not that hard to turn it. But it's something that's there to be unlocked and to be worked with. So I've broken this chart down into looking at some of the different aspects, and this is just the goddesses themselves, and this is such a beautiful, almost crystalline structure that's created here. It really is a very pretty thing. But it's interesting to note that on that day, we had Uranus and Eris had been traveling together for a couple of years now, but they hooked up with Ceres, with Demeter, also in Aries on that particular day. And then we had the moon conjunct Lilith, and we had Juno conjunct Saturn, and there was a stellium in Pisces of Venus, Neptune, Pallas Athena, and the South Node. So, what happened was there was an inevitability here. If we look at Vesta, we can see how amazingly integrated she was into the chart. She's touching every single point in this chart, and we could break this down. And there's a number of different things going on here. Excuse me as I rifle through my pages. This is all about individualized self-expression. Saturn to Saturn and Vesta, the Sagittarius. It says that I am your equal, whether you like it or believe it or not. We will dream a future that is radically different from the past. These are the kind of messages that come through in these aspects where there is disruptive energy, there's chaotic energy, there is energy that feels trapped, there's energy that is dreaming, something much different than what we have, and there's the activist. Women from everywhere came out and stood up for what they believed. That's Athena. Athena was always there to stand for what it is that she believed in, to fight for it. She would first try to find some peaceful way to open the space for it to happen. But when it didn't happen, she had no hesitation to pick up her weapon. And if we think about the women in our world at the moment who are standing in spite of any kind of personal degradation or rebuttal or punishment or whatever, they don't care. It's most important to them that these issues are aired and outed, and that we can begin to deal with them and not shy from all the negative things that have happened, which is what's happened. What's happened. So many relationships, and I think Zeus and Hera is such a perfect example. She knew everything that was going on that he was doing. She stayed with him. She couldn't change him. But here we are. We're at the next generation of this. Where no, we're not going to stand for that anymore. This is where Black Moon and Lilith plays a role. And says, no, this is where I draw the line in the sand, and this is as far as this can possibly go. And Athena doesn't seem to be quite as engaged with the rest of the chart, but here she is in the stellium with Neptune and the South Node. And so she is informing us about what's happened in the past. She's informing us about what needs to change, where we need to go forward, how we can redream our world, and how we can redream our relationship with each other, and especially between men and women. It's very, very powerful with her she was on on the lunar nodes for quite a while, and just feeding us with these inner emotional currents that were undeniable, where we recognized that no, we can't sit still with this anymore. We have to move. We have to have movement. We have to have change. We have to have transformation. And Juno up here is next to Saturn. And, this might seem to be an odd kind of combination, Saturn, well, that's Kronos. But it's also where she was claiming her authority, and the authority of what she believed, and her authority of what she had to do. There are trines to Ceres, there are trines to Eris. Ceres and Demeter is, it's where we've experienced loss, and we have had tremendous emotional loss in our culture recently, and I think it's spread beyond our own borders. I think that if we look, globally around the world, we will see that there is a huge tension and crisis between what would serve all of us and what just serves a few. And that's where the loss has occurred, that the individual abilities of everybody who isn't born with advantage, or born with money, or born into some political family, or born into a Hollywood family, or whatever, doesn't have that advantage, can actually find their way in the world without being interfered with. But here also, with Hera, we're also seeing anger and rage, and we're seeing this coming out. And this is me too. This is saying no. This just can't go on anymore. This has to be resolved. On October 5th, the New York Times, two women from the New York Times wrote an article exposing Harvey Weinstein. And that opened up the entire Me Too paradigm, the entire Me Too event, which is still going on. And it has named and pulled in, dozens and dozens of women and men who, this has been going on for decades. It permeates our society. It's interesting. If we was watching some of the programs and the plays that had written about English royalty, and they were talking about Prince Charles. It was normal for someone in that position to have a mistress. It was accepted. Everybody knew that everyone in the line of English royalty had a mistress. It was just taken for granted. I mean, this is the mindset of our country, and in some places, it's actually been concretized. It's part of the structure. It's just part of the given culture that we live in. That this can go on, and it's okay. And when the Harvey Weinstein event occurred, it was an announcement that no, this is not okay any longer. This is not something that we can stomach. Again, in these major aspects, first of all, actually, this was a full moon, which I think is really very interesting that this revelation came about. But there are also two grand trines. We have Saturn, Uranus, and the North Node trining, and then we have Pluto, Pallas, and Mars and Venus coming together, working in unison. The other interesting thing here that's non-asteroid is the fact that this was also occurred at the conjunction of Venus and Mars. And, this is all about the balance of anima and animus. This is bringing this together. And so here in Virgo, this is a healing process whereby, we're beginning to be made aware of how we need to heal these deep wounds, these deep, imbalances, in our culture, between men and women, and what's been accepted, in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. It's a new beginning, and it's symptoms of disease are an attempt to heal. So this is healing. This is we have to have, you break a fever. We have to have a fever. We have to have a rash. We have to, or something even worse than that, to alert us to the fact that what we have been doing to our body, whether it's our body politic or the body of our culture, collectively, is unhealthy. That there are unhealthy imbalances that we have basically buried and hidden, and I think that the Uranus Eris conjunction has a lot to do with exposing it, and certainly, certainly the conjunction of Venus and Mars also brings it right out to make us understand that this one cycle is ending and a new cycle is beginning. So in the goddess map, again, we have a T-square, and the T-square is Moon, Vesta, and Juno. And so, the moon is, we have to remember that 6,000 years ago, there were only two feminine archetypes. You were either a mother or you were a lover or partner. There were no other choices. So here we have Sun, Mercury, Vesta opposing the moon, and Pluto squaring them. Pluto is creating this crisis to make us realize that the patterns that we have settled into, that what has become familiar to us, the moon, the selfishness that we accept as normal, is okay. It's not. Interestingly, this was Sun, Mercury, Vesta. These two women, their names were Jodie Cantor and Megan Tukey. Just raised their hand or stood up. They said, no, this has to be exposed. We have to expose this and talk about it. So it was something that was really, I see it as fate, personally. This was a fated event that was inevitable. Also, we have Pallas here, trining Pluto, trining Juno, and trining the new cycle of Venus and Mars. So again, she's standing there. She's standing up for us, but she's also whispering in our ear. She's standing kind of behind us, or showing up in disguise often, very often, to in some familiar form, to let us know, to tell us something that we're not hearing, that we're not seeing, and her messages resonate. Her message, whatever her message holds, has a hook. It has a resonance to it that's undeniable. It's when you hear the truth, you recognize it, and she speaks truth. She speaks to her truth. Again, here we have Vesta, totally linked into everything that's going on here. She was opposite the moon, as I said, and which created this great tension and need to balance what we really know to be sacred with this need to just self-expression and who we are and who we've been, and it's okay, and we can just keep going on that way and it doesn't matter. Well, we're finding out that it does matter. And so all these women started to come forward, and we began to realize the the losses that had been occurring, the wounds that had been happening, and the pain that was being suffered by one person's action. And it turns out he wasn't just one person; he was one of a multitude. Vesta here, Pallas Athena here, again, is totally linked into the chart. She's trining Pluto. She's trining Vesta. She's trining Venus and Mars, and creating some difficult connections to Lilith and to the Sun, Mercury, Jupiter. We like to think that it's the easy aspects are the ones that get things done. Well, they're not. It's the hard aspects that really make things happen, because it's kind of like that grand square that's locked. It needs to have something come along and unlock it, and set all that energy. It has tremendous energy potential. It's almost nuclear in a sense in the energy that it contains. 4 squares and 2 oppositions. It's explosive, but it needs something to set it off. And when it does go off, tremendous change is possible. And this is really what the kinds of things that have been going on here. Excuse me. So Juno also squaring squaring the moon, and squaring. Just be sure here. Look at this. Yeah, squaring the moon, squaring Venus, and squaring Mercury and Vesta and the Sun. Again, this is the rage. This is the anger. This is the necessary disruption to the status quo. It's in Capricorn that had to occur. That has to occur. That consensus reality that has allowed all this to happen. That has literally buried and just encapsulated these little cancers, these tumors within the emotional dynamics of men and women over so many millennium. It's all coming out in the wash. And the good news is that we're seeing this, and we are recognizing what's really going on. Obviously, there are even broader examples of this in our world. Certainly in our country with our political situation, and it's not that much different in other places. I think it's important to recognize that these asteroids and these feminine archetypes are adding a whole other layer of activity to what's going on. Yes, we can attribute it to, Mars squaring Uranus. I mean, clearly over the past, even few days with the fires and the bridge collapses and the earthquakes and all the calamities that have occurred. But when we look at the placements of Athena or Vesta or Juno, we begin to get another whole dimension and understanding that there's another whole scenario, there's another whole play that's unfolding behind this that has a whole different message to it. And it perhaps is as important, maybe even more important than what's happening on the surface. It's more below the surface in a way, because it's we don't assume the asteroids to be quite as powerful as planets. But I think we're learning that when these asteroids work in unison and when they link up with the planetary dynamics, that they really change the stories and they change the dynamics in a way that we wouldn't be aware of if we didn't know their placements and understand their archetypes. They're very, very powerful indicators of really it's like taking our temperature in a sense of it's a measurement of really where we are. And what this is showing us is that we're running a very high fever, and we haven't even been aware of it. We may have, been uncomfortable, but we didn't know why we were uncomfortable. We had symptoms, but we didn't know what the cause of those symptoms was. And from this, we can begin to see really what's happening in terms of, what we need to do. So, what's the remedy? Where are the remedies here? The remedy always is that we have to see what the positive facility of each of these archetypes can do, and it's important. I think Pallas to me represents responsibility. She represents, just standing up. All Vesta certainly as well, but Athena in her own way, because she's much more public and much more visible than Vesta ever was. Vesta, it was kind of, she was there, but more invisible. She was more a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? The domicile, the sense of peace, the sense of, finding our comfort and our safety, if you would. That there was a safety factor to her. But Athena is not so much about having to be safe. She's about having to be, what we need to go forward. She was the patroness of craftspeople. She helped invent the harness for horses. She's known for having inspired many kinds of practical inventions and things that really advanced human culture, human society, and it's why she was so well loved and so revered. Hera, to a great degree, is showing us that we can that our fulfillment is in relationship, and that's really what she was about. That we are fulfilled in relationship. We can't just exist by ourselves. Yes, we can probably go through most of life trying to fulfill our own needs, but it's, we don't really, we're not going to find that fulfillment. We're just going to find a lack of, want perhaps, but not in the emotional level. Clearly, she was not always the most balanced, but, we can understand it. If somebody does you dirty, then, what do? You don't want to just roll with it and kind of just roll over. So she's showing us that there are two sides that we really need to be committed, but when the relationship kind of is veering off course, that we need to do something to bring it back. One of the most interesting things that's happened this year is that Uranus was conjunct Juno through the eclipses. And I don't know, there were so many, issues of different people with breakups and, all kinds of turbulence in a relationship. And I'm wondering if anybody else has experienced that or saw some of the things where contracts between people got renegotiated. And it wasn't just lovers. It may have been your boss or your best friend or your neighbor, or someone who you were in a relationship with, and something was changing. Something in that relationship was shifting, and it needed to be reworked. And in some cases, it wasn't able to be reworked, and it ended. So these asteroids are quite powerful and quite meaningful, and we have to recognize and take advantage of what they can tell us and how we can work with them to the best of our ability, to be able to fulfill ourselves, whether it's spiritually through Vesta or in relationship through Juno, or just in terms of really where we stand in our society and the position that we hold, and how we deal with the collective and who we are in the collective. I see Athena more as serving that role, where we recognize that we are part of the collective, that we can't just go home every night and watch television and let somebody else take care of it, that we have to step up. Sure, most of us already are fulfilling that, whether we're astrologers or we're doing something in the community. But, to a great degree, I think that we are the minority. And the world is the way that it is because of a lack of responsibility and the lack of standing up for what you believe in and the lack of commitment to what you consider to be sacred. And that's what these goddesses all stood for. So I'll open the floor up to any questions or comments. Anybody have anything that they'd like to say or ask?
Daniel, I'm curious as to what is that symbol at 26 Taurus?
That's Sedna.
Sedna, okay.
Sedna, yeah. There's a great book that's just been written by Alan Clay about Sedna. I would suggest you get the digital version of it, because the book itself, I don't know if you can see it back here, it's like a brick. I have trouble reading it because I don't know how to hold on to it and read it at the same time. But Sedna is about consciousness, and wherever Sedna is aspecting in our chart, whatever it's aspecting is showing us where we are becoming more conscious.
Daniel, what can you tell us about the asteroids acting as octave transformers?
As what?
Octave transformers, ruling another planet and taking it up to a higher level, because the asteroids are between Mars and Jupiter, right? And yes. So, for example, Juno is the octave transformer for Venus.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
I haven't. This is a whole new concept for me.
Okay, well, that's another meeting, so let's not worry about it.
Okay. But I can resonate with it. I like what you're saying, because clearly they are the bridge between the inner planets and the outer planets. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So any other questions from our audience? We have quite a bit of time left, so please do feel free. Go ahead, Cameron.
I was going to ask you, can you say the rest of them, the octave signatures?
Yes, give me a moment and I'll just go grab them, because I don't want to make a mistake. So I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
While we're waiting for Linda to come back, going back to that Sedna, my eye went straight to it because it squared the nodes. And I find it interesting that it's in the same sign, it being square the nodes, the sun being conjunct Jupiter, it's quite wide, but being conjunct also Mercury, and the sun being the ruler of the North Node. Kind of seems like it signaled that, chopping, and of course that 26 Taurus is the Algol, fixed star Algol. Right. So kind of the chopping off of the big head, bringing the big head down.
It's interesting that you say chopping off, because that is part of the mythology of Sedna. She was an Inuit goddess, Eskimo. And there are a couple of different versions, but the gist of it is that she was very much in love with this man, and her father wanted her to have really did not want to have anything to do with him, and he put her in his whaling boat and took her out to sea and pushed her overboard, and she grabbed onto the edge of the boat. And he chopped her fingers off, and she slid down into the depths. And the myth goes that her fingers actually became all the whales and seals and mammals of the ocean. Rose Marcus talks about Sedna, and the way that she describes Sedna is that there are great treasures that are hidden in the sea, but we need to dive deep to get them.
Wow, that's just amazing. Like I say, time looking at that, square the nodes and kind of how it really just ties in with Pallas, with Juno, and the whole situation here in the chart.
Mm-hmm. But Sedna is a minor planet. She's not an asteroid. She's one of the trans-Neptunian objects. She's out there with Haumea and Maki, and all those trans-Neptunians that have been found in the past 10 years.
Great. So Daniel, do you have a last slide that you wanted to share?
Nope, just me.
Just that one. Yeah, we'll keep that up for a while because I do want to share my screen after this.
Great.
So, any more questions? Okay, so if you could please stop share, and I'll just share the octave transformers. This comes from the EA glossary. Okay. So you can see there that Mercury, the lower octave, the higher octave Uranus, and the octave transformer is Pallas. Venus and Neptune, octave transformer is Juno. And for Mars and Pluto, the octave transformer is Lilith. So that's just 3 of them, but there's probably more. So Daniel, what do you think of that?
It's fascinating. Yes, it definitely makes a lot of sense. Because Pallas is, in a way, because she informs us, she is very much the bridge between Uranus and Mercury, where we're, she is those ideas and thoughts and messages that seem to come to us of their own volition, which is how I categorize Uranus. So yeah, she definitely would bridge between the two. Venus and Neptune, clearly Juno was the marriage was sacred to her, and with it definitely, yeah. I mean, I don't know that I can verbalize it, but that does definitely make sense. The Mars, Pluto, and Lilith is a little harder to really integrate.
It's asteroid Lilith.
Go ahead.
Yeah, asteroid. It's asteroid Lilith.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Okay. So, both Mars and Pluto are totally uncompromising. I think that that's something they have in common. Mars because he's so instinctive, because he's so self-centered. Pluto because he's Pluto. And Lilith really holds that energy as well. Lilith, basically said to Adam, F you and the horse you rode in on, and she was gone. So I can see how she could bridge the between the two of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. All right, so I'll just stop my share here, and we'll take a few more questions if there are any, or comments.
How do you see these in the person's natal chart, especially when they're conjunct another planet?
Well, I think we have to start with different types of. I would refer you to Jean Shimoda Bowen, because she has written a fantastic book that really describes the Athena woman, the Juno woman, the Demeter woman, etc., and all of the psychological dynamics that surround it. But basically, Athena both Athena, Artemis, and Vesta rejected any romantic advances. They really were very solitary, independent women. They were all virgin goddesses. Demeter was raped by Poseidon, just as her daughter was raped by Hades. So there's a wounding that and a loss that really can be exhibited. Demeter Ceres really was the great mother. She comes closest, I think, to expressing the archetype of the original fertility goddess, because she really embodies that maternal nature, but yet she has that cataclysmic experience, PTSD, in her experience that really overshadows and its contrast to that maternity. Vesta stands alone because she basically there isn't a lot of mythology to go on. We don't really have a lot to work with in terms of stories about her, and again because she was more of the essence of something rather than an active personality, so to speak. There's no real stories. I mean, she wasn't part of the Trojan War. She didn't, she didn't really have much interaction with the other gods and goddesses. But it is important to know that in Greek culture, before any meal, before any major event, she was always invoked, and she was always there was also an invocation and a convocation, I guess. I don't know what you call the one at the end, but any kind of meeting or whatever, she was always the first and the last. There was always some invocation of her to bring in her presence, because she, from my perspective, she represents that spirit, that dynamic, aspect of divine spark that we all carry. We have, it's about authenticity, Wanda. We have to really recognize what's in our heart, not what's in our head. And we have to be able to live according to whatever that commitment. We have to be willing to make the sacrifice, and we have to be willing to stay connected and to be active. I think all those things are important, whether we're a man or a woman. We can't get shut down. We can't get just moved into some place where we can no longer engage. We have to stay engaged, and that means staying engaged with ourselves. And it really, I think, what each of these goddesses teaches us is that it's not what's happening outside of us that determines what will happen to us. It's what comes from the inside of us that will determine it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
It's not just about responding to what happens. It's about expressing what's within us, and letting that expression be alive. Be who we are, because that's the determinant of our. That's our destiny, really.
So, Daniel, I know that you're studying mythology.
Yes.
Can you tell me why the mythological stories are so violent?
Are violent?
Yeah.
Because they're not all violent. I have to.
Not all, but there always seems to be violence in there.
Well, the best answer I think I can give you is that the mythology is about archetypes, and these archetypes are primal images that we carry within us. They're not external to us. The gods are not external to us. The goddesses are not external to us. We carry them within us. And I think that they reflect human nature, that we have a violence within us. There's no question. So they reflect that same human nature. They really are us, in a more magnified perspective.
Wouldn't they then express externally? Because we look at the world and it's, there's a lot of violence out there.
Well, they do express externally. Yeah, they do. Maybe I'm missing your question.
No, that's okay. Oh, that answers it really, really well. All right. So, Daniel, I want to thank you so much for a wonderful meeting.
Thank you.
And looking forward to seeing you next time. Would you all please thank Daniel Fiverson?
Thank you, Daniel.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting.
Wonderful.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you.